Hello, this is Deborah with Black Education TV. I'm going to be talking about the essence of spiritual warfare because it's become very apparent that we as so-called black people don't understand the essence of spiritual warfare. When we think in terms of spiritual warfare, we think of things that are very superficial. We've boiled spiritual warfare down to simple tasks that we do on a daily basis that amount to nothing. You're going into a 30-second prayer or bowing your head for a moment of silence or even fasting for a day, or your little simple meditation tactics or whatever it is that you engage in. Even if your prayer extends beyond 1 minute or 5 minutes or whatever, we believe those things to be spiritual warfare. And we tend to do these things almost robotic-like, as if we're trying to just do a good deed for the day. As if we think that we are fulfilling a quota. Okay, I've got my prayer in, I've gotten my meditation in, I've read my Bible for about 20 minutes. I've done my part. Unfortunately, that's what many of us have boiled spiritual warfare down to be, some task that we can do to just get it out of the way to say, I've done it for the day. When we don't understand spiritual warfare, or the essence of spiritual warfare, begins with the knowledge of what the battle is. And even if you know what the battle is, if you don't understand the battle, you're still back at square one. And unfortunately, many of us don't understand the battle. We've heard scripture time and time again that tells us many things about this battle, but we have not grasped the reality of what's really truly going on. When we hear the scripture that says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. Do you know how many of us don't really understand what that's trying to tell us? And so, when you don't understand what it's trying to tell you, what the word is trying to tell you, you can make so many battle errors. As a matter of fact, many of us have not even entered into battle. It's a one-sided battle where the enemy is launching all of the missiles, throwing all of the fiery darts, and engaging in this war, the spiritual war. And we are just kind of on the sideline dodging bullets and weapons and missiles, bombs, fiery darts. In other words, we are acting in fear because we are not engaged in the battle, because we don't understand the battle and we don't understand our position. We don't understand the weapons. The scripture very clearly tells us to put on the whole armor, that we may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. But some of us we'll grab our sword, which is the word, and we think that's enough. Although you may swing your sword, if one of those fiery darts is able to penetrate your chest because you don't have on your breastplate, you're dead. And one of those weapons, such as the enemy's sword, is able to strike your temple or your head, you're dead. If your feet, which are supposed to be prepared with the preparation of the good news of shalom, or as the King James Version says, the gospel of peace, if your feet are taken out in the battle, your whole body goes down. So without that breastplate and that sword to quench the fiery darts and the shield to quench the fiery darts, and your feet being prepared, and your helmet, and any other part of the battle gear, without any of that, and all you have is your sword, then what do you have? You have a lost battle. But what if you have on every piece of the garment, but you don't have your sword? You're just a standing target, because without that sword, you're unable to engage in the battle. You're only able to ward off the enemy's devices that are aimed at you for a moment, but you're unable to fight. So you see, without understanding the essence of spiritual warfare, in which one of the main parts is to be dressed for the battle, having on the whole armor, you have nothing at all. You've lost. And not being able to understand the battle that you're in, I mean, that's very important. Imagine this. You have two battlefields. And one of the battlefields, you have an enemy that only has a slingshot, in which, knowing the story of David or David, we know that that's all enough. That's more than enough to kill an enemy. It's enough to kill a giant. But here is another scenario. If you enter into a battlefield where there's not only slingshots, but fiery darts, missiles, atomic bombs, nuclear weapons, rockets, battleships, tanks, high-powered weapons, automatic weapons. If you enter into a battlefield that is of that nature, then you are entering into a very, very dangerous situation. Now, that's not to diminish the battlefield that you're entering, where there's just a person with a slingshot and a stone. But there is a different mindset that you must have when entering into the second battle. You can't enter into that battle the same way that you enter into the battle with the person with the slingshot and the sword. Now, with both battles, you must have on the whole armor. Let's keep that in mind. You must have on the whole armor. But let me give you another scenario. If you enter into a battlefield where there is this person that has the slingshot and the stone, but they don't have any arms or any legs, but this is all they have, and it's sitting in front of them on the ground, more than likely you're going to enter into that battlefield with confidence. Understand what I'm saying? But if you enter into the battlefield where you have all of these people and you're surrounded by all of these different weapons and they're all aimed at you, it's highly doubtful that you're just going to enter into that space without thinking things out first. Now, I want you to understand that these are battles that you must enter in. You can't say, well, I'm not going to go and join this battle. These are battles that you are involved in. You have to. You have no choice. See, that's another problem with us as a people. We don't understand that we are in these battles, whether we want to be or not. And so you have to do something. You have to fight. But when you go into any battlefield without the proper understanding of who your enemy is and what they are capable of, that's another way to lose the battle, to lose the fight. And so understanding the essence of spiritual warfare, the importance of it, the nature of it, is something that we've got to come to terms with, family, because what we're doing right now is not working. We are using outdated information that never really applied in the first place. We are using Christian information in which the enemies that we speak of, have given us this information. They've told us to resist the battle by praying for our enemies. Resist the battle by praying for our enemies. We've been told that we are to bless those that hate us and do good to those that despitefully misuse us. So imagine this. You go into a battlefield and all you have in your mind is to bless those that hate you. And so you know that you're surrounded by those who hate you. And so what you're going to do is you're going to enter into that battlefield and you're going to give them water, cold water. You're going to bring them meals, hand out hugs, kisses. And those enemies are going to say, checkmate. We got this one. It was an easy target. Very easy target. And then they blow you away. We've been taken out of the battle mind because we don't understand spiritual warfare. I'm going to give you some other very, very simplistic scenarios that we need to understand as a people. See, we are so easily tricked and manipulated by things and gestures and even gifts that our enemies devised a plan a very long time ago, and they've been implementing this plan over and over and over with each generation of us that comes about, because the parents are not preparing the next generation to understand and know the battle, or to know and understand the enemy. So what happens is, when we enter into our battlefields daily, one of our enemies may come up to us and approach us with a smile. And that smile takes us right out of the game, because we have been tricked into thinking that a kind gesture or a smile or something of that nature is proof that this person is okay, they're good. This is a good person. They're so friendly, they're so nice. Let me tell you something, family. In war, you trust no one. You can barely even trust your own comrades, your own teammates, because at any time they could have been infiltrated by the enemy. And see, that's the catch-22 of being who we are. It's very difficult to trust anyone because we are so easily manipulated that at any given time, one of us can be tricked by the enemy to turn on the rest of the team. And so part of being in this battle is to have spiritual discernment. Many of you are familiar with the song that says, smiling faces sometimes tell lies. It tells you to beware of the handshake. But a person that's wise in this battle, let me tell you how their minds have to be. You can be in the presence of an enemy. This enemy has smiled at you, has even given you gifts, made kind gestures, has even alluded to being on your side or being someone who is for you. Now, right now, I'm not just talking about enemies or enemies that are Gentiles. Okay, because whenever we think about enemies, we're always thinking Gentiles, but you can have enemies that look just like you. Okay, but think about this for a moment. Whether it's an enemy that looks like you or an enemy that's of other nations, You can have a person who smiles at you, pretends to be on your side, befriends you to gain information, to go back and tell the enemy. Now, in this case, I'm talking about go back to tell a spiritual enemy, demons, spirits, and it could be other people even. But this person approaches you as a friend. Without spiritual discernment, you will be sucked right into that. Spiritual discernment says that even though this person appears to be friendly and smiling, I don't think I can trust them. Because your soul is at stake, you have to think that way, family, because there are evil forces at work in this world right now, and so many people are being tricked and fooled and suckered into positions where they are completely vulnerable. Their families are completely vulnerable. We have all been there before, where we've put trust in the wrong hands. But let me tell you something. I was going to tell you that what I wanted to say is that when you're involved in a situation to where you have been infiltrated by an enemy, you don't always want to let that enemy know that you're on to them, because that enemy can respond in a different way if they know that they've been discovered. This is where spiritual warfare kicks in. Knowing what to do to an enemy that has infiltrated you. See, there's nothing they can do when you're involved in real, true spiritual warfare, because greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. And if Yah be for us, who can be against us? And also keep in mind that Yah will become an enemy to our enemies if we walk upright before him. So if you have been infiltrated, there is no need to sound the alarm to that enemy to let them know that they've been discovered. You put this in the hand of Abba Yah, and I tell you what, that enemy will be destroyed. That enemy will go up in flames, billow down in smoke, and fall at your feet as ashes, if you know what to do. We must understand the essence of spiritual warfare, family, so a smiling face is not enough to take you from your place. Even if you do see that smiling face, you're able to identify what is sinister behind that smile, what's sinister and dark behind those glistening eyes, and even with that much fair speech. And sometimes, let me tell you, sometimes these people can say words that even appear as though they are spiritual. You can have people approach you saying that, oh, I've been praying for you. Oh, I've been thinking about you. Oh, I've been this and I've been that, to appear spiritual. Oh, I had a dream about you. Oh, this and oh, that. Family, spiritual discernment will uncloud your vision to where you can see people for who they truly are. Understand that you don't always have to blow your cover. Don't blow your cover by explaining to this enemy that you know who they are. You do your thing righteously. And in righteousness Yah shall deliver you from every enemy. This is how we have been able to be tricked and manipulated by other nations for so very long, because they come bearing gifts. And when they whip out the gifts, we succumb to their wicked nature because we've been fooled by it. We've been so docilized as a people that it doesn't take much to trick us into believing that someone is a friend when they're really an enemy. Now, keep in mind that sometimes it's not always readily seen or seen right away. Sometimes you have to observe a person or be around a person. I'll just use a workplace scenario, for instance. My husband gave a testimony some time ago where there was a white guy who was hired in around the same time he was at this particular company. And he greeted him with handshakes and friendly gestures and all of this. And my husband was like, oh, he's a nice fella. Man, he's a nice guy, you know. Treating my husband like a buddy and all this, and just, just overall friendly guy. But then his true nature came out. It was a sales position that they had, and there was a week where my husband did well in sales, and this particular guy hadn't gotten any sales. And so he was starting to feel some kind of way about this so-called black man who was getting sales and he was not. So when he was able to get an opportunity, he grabbed one of my husband's sales from the desk where they had turned them in, and he basically took it. I guess he wanted to examine the paperwork to see if there was any way that he could switch the names to make it appear as though he got the sale. Out of frustration, I guess he figured, no, this is not even possible. So he left it in his bag, his sales bag. And sometime later, after the guy was no longer with the company, the boss found the old sale in his bag. And he told my husband and a few other people that, you remember the guy that used to work here? He had your sale in his bag. Now, mind you, he greeted my husband with smiles and friendly gestures and good morning and all of this other stuff. And so, what we must understand in this spiritual battle is that you have to know your enemy. Your enemy will use any tactic. He'll use a smile. He'll use anything to trick you, to trick your mind, to make you think that he is not an enemy. I want you to understand what I'm trying to articulate here. The essence of spiritual warfare is to be armed completely, putting on the whole armor, to understand who your enemy is, regardless to race or culture, or whether it's a spiritual enemy, because there are spiritual enemies, demons, demonic entities that can also infiltrate your mind. Okay, so there are many. You just think about this, family. You are surrounded by enemies, enemies of flesh and blood, enemies of a spiritual nature, enemies that were once friends, enemies that can be family, co-workers, Christians, Hebrew Israelites. It doesn't matter. Enemies come in all shapes, sizes, and forms. And if you don't understand what an enemy is, how can you fight the enemy? If you're not armed properly, how can you fight the enemy? How can you engage in war if you are not properly dressed? And if you are without understanding, how can you engage in war? If you don't understand the battle, how can you engage in war? There is so much to spiritual warfare, family. And knowing how to engage in spiritual warfare is very important. Now, I haven't covered how to engage in spiritual warfare in this video because I first want you to understand that the essence of spiritual warfare is to understand what's going on in the first place. And without knowledge of what's going on, you cannot engage in spiritual warfare. And you cannot have superficial ideologies about spiritual warfare. None of that superficial stuff will amount to anything. You must go beyond all of those things. You must have spiritual discernment before you can even enter into spiritual warfare effectively. Because you will have people right there in front of you who may appear to be friends or on your side, but they are engaged in this battle against you. And you cannot always expose that fact. When you're in a situation like that, you definitely have to have wisdom, be armed with wisdom, so that you can take this enemy out effectively because they have infiltrated your space. Okay. Now, family, there is so much more to spiritual warfare that I'm going to have to cover this in another segment as well, because our people need to understand that you're in this battle whether you want to be in it or not. And the reason why so many are taken out is because they've entered this battle as little babes or babies with full-grown enemies who don't care that you're just a baby. You've entered this battle not knowing what direction to turn in, what direction the enemy's devices are going to be aimed from. And so we want you, family, to understand and to learn the essence of spiritual warfare. Okay? The word says that we must study to show ourselves approved. I want you to study, family. I want you to pray and meditate and seek the Most High Yah with all your heart and might, because the enemy is trying to take you out. And he will use whomever will allow him. He'll even use your own family because he wants you destroyed. He will use anyone. Understand this, family. The enemy will use anyone. He will use those who you believe to be friends. There's no reason for us to fear when we are armed with knowledge and understanding and wisdom. Even if you have been infiltrated by someone who you believe that you can trust, fear not. If you engage yourself in this battle properly, being fully armed, having on the whole armor, having full understanding, full discernment, and wisdom. With all of those things, you'll be able to engage that enemy and take them out quickly. Now, we will talk about it at another time, what we need to do, in which we've already talked about these things before, but I don't think, from some of the questions we receive, I don't believe that many of us understand how to engage in warfare, because we've been taught for so long all of this love and forgiveness and all of this unity with enemies. How can you unify with your enemy? That's impossible, family. It is impossible. When you unify with your enemy sees you as a sucker that they're able to just take out quickly. And this is why they are doing just that. This is why the enemy does just that. Another thing I want to leave you with before I close out this video. A lot of the battle is in your mind. If you can get your mind straight, you can have full understanding of what's going on. This is why the enemy goes after our minds, because he knows that the real battlefield is in the mind. If you can conquer your own thoughts and bring into captivity every thought into obedience and to the will of the Father, then you are almost there, family. Because once your mind is right, once your mind is clear, and once you understand what is going on, you become dangerous to the enemy. This is why you will hear the term knowledge is power. This is why the enemy tried to strip us of knowledge. This is why one of our enemies made it illegal for us to learn to read. They didn't want us to have knowledge of any kind. And now that we are able to learn to read, they've done other things. They've replaced wanting to read and have knowledge with other things, entertainment, anything to distract your mind. Anything to pull your mind out of the battle, because once they have control of your mind, they have control of your body, family. This is why we must understand the essence of spiritual warfare. Understanding where the battle takes place, who the enemy is, what the battlefield looks like, all of the hiding places, all of the necessary armor and weapons to engage in this battle. This is what we must understand, family. Now, I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to have to pick this up again at a later time. But I want you to know, family, that understanding what time we're in right now is so very important. Let's get ourselves ready for this battle, because the battle is going to go on with or without you. Shalom, family.